Welcome to Only for Your Ears and today's episode. But first, I'd like to say thank you to the people that have liked, shared, and subscribed. This is very much appreciated and it helps to encourage developing the channel. Now, let's begin with episode 42 Kept Secret but Not Forgotten by Hans Christian Andersen, which I've renamed as Silence is Golden. I'll start off with my summary as usual. The structure will remain the same, where I'll digress on one or two sentences and give a brief reflection. Then I'll move on to my critical review on how I see this fairy tale and how it plays in today's society using parallels with examples from films or books, etc. Then, last but not least, the trigger points. I will take a look at some of the things in the film or the fairy tale that triggered me, mainly from the films. So let's begin with episode 42, Kept Secret and Not Forgotten, or Silence is Golden. The fairy tale explores the idea that people may carry hidden emotions such as pain, love, or gratitude, which can shape their lives and the lives of others. These emotions may be kept secret, but they are not forgotten and can drive people's actions and decisions. There is a rich and colourful landscape within us, much like filigreed, that keeps and nourishes heartfelt gestures we keep close like hidden treasures. Our hearts and minds illuminate these gestures like a photograph imprinted on our souls. Maybe this is why it's so hard to erase the damage of disgraceful acts that has led to our unforgiveness. I digress. Unfortunately, this is very true. That secret, but not forgiven, is a fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen that revolves around three interconnected stories. The first story takes place in an old mansion, home to Lady Met Morgan's, when robbers invade her home, killing three guards and her watchdog. She is chained to a kennel. The robber's servant boy, whose father Lady Met had once tried to help when he was punished, remembers her kindness and frees her. I digress. The consequence of the Mets, of the Lady Met's good karma has been paid back in full, unbeknownst to her by the boy, and she had no idea he saw her. Together, they seek help, leading to the hanging of the robbers. The phrase kept secret but not forgotten is uttered by the boy, highlighting the impact of small, kind actions. I digress. The silent witness to her genuine action created the space to witness poetic justice through collaboration. Silence is golden. Reflection, the nobility of selflessness. In each of the stories, the protagonists display selflessness and the sacrifice for the benefit of others. Lady Met's acts of kindness for the boy's father, the noble lady's generosity towards the less fortunate, and the maid's willingness to let go of her love for her lover's well-being all emphasize the importance of putting others before ourselves. Imagine that. In the second story, a noble lady lives in a mansion in modern times. Known for her good deeds, she helps a paralyzed girl see the outside. She gets to view the outside. by opening the windows to her room, bringing in light and the view of the outside world. The lady continues to do good deeds in secret, emphasizing the power of anonymous acts of kindness. I digress. I believe this is the most precious of all acts, being able to give selflessly without ego or audience. The third story takes place in a city where a maid of all work who is mourning for her former lover. I digress. A death of a relationship can be so painful, especially if one of the parties have quickly moved on and found new love. It's as though what they shared was easily forgotten. She works in a well-kept kitchen and that's very clean. After parting ways years ago to allow her lover to marry a rich widow, she runs into him and learns of his unhappiness. My, how unfortunate. I digress. Her heart must have in part soared with a full sense of hope. He passes away, leaving her to grieve. I digress. Some of the best moments of true love is unrequited love because even though your love has not been reciprocated, you still continue to love them without conditions. So that's why I say sometimes unrequited love can be the best love of all. But not forgotten, showing the impact of hidden emotions. These three stories illustrate the significance of small, kind actions and the power of secrets and the hidden emotions. The phrase kept but not forgotten ties the stories together, highlighting the importance of both the seen and the unseen in our lives. The overall conclusion, the interconnected stories reveal how bonds between people, even when they may be severed or kept hidden, can remain strong and influential throughout their lives. The connection between the servant boy and Lady Met, the love between the maid and her former lover, and the gratitude of the paralyzed girl for the noble lady all demonstrate the lasting impact of relationships. Yes, just on that note with the paralyzed girl, I remember many years ago when I was in Barcelona, I got on the tram and there was this severely handicapped young man, young boy really, with his father. And it was really strange. I looked at him and then I turned my head quickly away because I didn't want him to see me looking at him. But he saw, we caught eye contact and he looked at me and he said, hello. And I turned around. He knew to say hello instead of saying hola. He says, hello. And I said to him, hello. And it was really, I don't know if I was committing a kind act, but all he wanted was to say hello. He wanted that human contact in a world where I'm sorry to say, we're not always that kind. Now for my critical review on how this fairy tale plays in today's society. My critical review on how this fairy tale plays in today's society. Let's begin. How many times have you borne witness to such wonderful acts of kindness done behind closed doors, or been privy to someone's act of kindness through word of mouth? Upon reflection, I can't think of many situations where I've witnessed such acts like these. Nowadays, people like to be seen as the giver to impress onlookers so they can be perceived as the good Samaritan doing God's work, or the compassionate, caring soul who craves for world peace. When we do these small or great acts of kindness for God without ego, people can see the true, pure intentions of our hearts. Now, I must just go back here. It's not just you can do it without God, and you can still have a pure heart. That's what I would say. It doesn't have to be God based. True, pure actions of our hearts. But human nature, like me on occasion, wants a public recognition to add towards good karma, in my case, and for most, a gold star on their reputation. I don't need to be seen as good anymore. I can say I spent a little over 50 years with a terrible reputation because I was misunderstood and an easy target for 80% of the time. People projected their shadow side onto me. However, there was a particular instance where I had done something that wasn't so good. For example, I blamed a small child for doing something they never did. I think the mother knew that I was lying because she could see the look of just disappointment on and sadness on her little girl's face. However, I was haunted with the terrible consequence of guilt for sacrificing my no better moral standards for short-term protection, for not taking responsibility for something I should have. This fairy tale blessed us with three heartfelt secret acts of kindness where they would be forever seen as priceless in our imagination and not forgotten. I'm going to use three films as a parallel to the fairy tale to frame my review in today's story. Let's take a look at my digress and then go into the first film, which is Dead Man Walking. The robber's servant boy, whose father Lady Met had once tried to help when he was punished, remembers her kindness and frees her. I digress. The consequence of the Met's good karma was paid back in full, unbeknownst to her by the boy, and she had no idea he saw her. Matthew Poncelet, a convict sentenced to death for murder and rape of a teenage couple, has been on death row at the Louisiana State Penitentiary for 6 years. His accomplice, Carl Vitello, was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As his scheduled execution date approaches, Poncelet asks Sister Helen Prejean, with whom he has corresponded, to help him with a final appeal. Sister Helen's application for commutation is rejected. Poncelet asks Sister to be his spiritual advisor through his execution, and she agrees. Sister Helen tells Poncelet that his redemption is possible through his execution, and she agrees. No, it's possible if he takes responsibility for what he did. Just before he is taken from the cell, Poncelet tearfully admits to the Sister Helen that he had killed the boy and raped the girl before Vitello killed her. As he is prepared for execution, he appeals to the boy's father for forgiveness and tells the girl's parents that he hopes his death brings them peace. Poncelet's execution by lethal injection and was given a proper burial. The murdered boy's father attends the funeral ceremony. Although he's filled with hate, he soon begins to pray with Sister Helen. Look at that, amazing. Afterthought, my afterthought. There were touches of the invisible hand of kindness executed in this film and true story by Sister Prejean's efforts through the compassion she gave to all the parties concerned, especially Matthew, as he walks through the last stages of his life and finally faces death with Sister praying earnestly for his life into the spirit realms. I understand the boy's father's deep hatred for the deceased convict and his hand of compassion for Sister Prejean's life as he prays for her too. This film and in the real life situation, it deals with a need for repentance and forgiveness, which is such a tricky thing. It doesn't matter how forgiving you are. Forgiveness is always difficult, especially if you can't pass your ego or pride. However, if we can put aside, in some cases, our hurt feelings, pride and ego, forgiveness is possible. Ooh, let's move on to number 2. I digress. I believe this is the most precious act of all, being able to give selflessly without ego or audience. The Green Mile. Tom Hanks plays a retired correction officer who worked at a Louisiana state prison in the quarters called the Green Mile, which housed hardcore criminals sentenced to death. Paul, played by Tom Hanks, is brought to tears while watching a film many years later and starts to reflect a time where he was introduced to a prisoner, John Coffey, a physically imposing but mild-mannered black man sentenced to death after being convicted of raping and murdering 2 young white girls. He joins Dell and another condemned convict, Arlen Bitterbuck, the first to be executed. The officers are forced to deal with psychotic new inmate, William Wild Bill Wharton, who frequently causes trouble by assaulting the officers and racially abusing John, forcing them to restrain him in the block's padded cell. On more than one occasion, John heals Paul's severe bladder infection by touching him and later resurrects Mr. Jingles, which is Paul's, the officer's pet mouse. Paul gradually realizes John possesses a supernatural ability to heal others, and he doubts whether someone with power to perform divine miracles is truly guilty of the crime. John's taken out of prison so that he can use his powers to heal Warden Moore's wife, Melinda, of a brain tumor, saving her life. After Percy is released from the padded room, the others are threatened. The others threatened to report him for his various acts of misconduct if his behavior continues. John has a psychic dream where John reveals in a vision to Paul that Wharton was the true culprit of the crimes that were committed, and he was wrongfully condemned. Paul is grief-stricken at the thought of having to be witness to his friend, an innocent man's death. However, John is executed. In the present day, he tells his wife that he viewed the world as a cruel place and he couldn't remain as a prison officer. Well, afterthought. The law allows commutations in some cases, in situations where you are up against the system, a very corrupt system. They will not do a reversal and they will not do a commutation, especially, and I have to say this, especially if it's a black man that's accused of raping raping two girls and maybe killing them as well. If Wharton was still alive, I don't know how the situation would have worked out. Maybe Wharton may have been convicted. I doubt it. But this is the reality. And in terms of a man of color, it doesn't matter how healing he is. If the system wants to believe an untrue story, they will, and have them executed. Number 3, I digress. Some of the best movies of true love is unrequited love. Why? Because even though the person you love doesn't love you that way in return, the love is still pure. Real love shouldn't be conditional. The Blind Side, based on a true story, Leanne Tui and her family opened their home and hearts to a homeless black teen named Michael Owar. Together, they become his family and help him develop his talents as a powerful football player. Leanne's initial act of kindness ended up changing her life and the lives of her 2 children, husband, Michael's high school, and later benefiting the NFL. Leanne has a face-to-face conversation with Michael's mother, who clearly does not have the capacity to look after herself, let alone her son. And Leanne asks, proposes adopting him. Although she seems unresponsive in the beginning, Denise finally wishes Michael the best. Michael is heavily recruited by many prestigious schools. SJ, which is the son, talks to coaches and negotiates on both Michael and his own behalf. He's quite a little negotiator for a boy. When Michael gets his grades high enough, he decides to attend University, Mississippi, known as Ole Miss. But as Ole Miss, Sean Sr. had played basketball there. Leanne was a cheerleader, and Miss Sue has been, NCAA. Investigator Granger is asked to look into the matter to determine if the Tuohys took him in and unduly influenced him just so he would play for their alma mater. Michael runs away in a confusion before the interview is over and confronts Leanne about her motives for taking him in. He then proceeds to find his biological mother, Denise, in her village. A gang leader welcomes him back, offers him a beer, and makes sexually offensive insinuations about Leanne and Collins. When Michael gets angry, the gang leader threatens to go after them. And as a result, Michael battles with him and others. After thinking things over and questioning Leanne, Michael tells Granger he chose Ole Miss because it's where my family goes to school. Michael is accepted into college and says farewell to the Tuohy family. Now, my afterthought is it's a beautiful film. There's so many moments of like what I would call just kept secret and not forgotten moments, or silence is golden. This is one of my all-time favorite films Although there's so many reasons to want to distrust the Tui family. And from his point of view, life hasn't been particularly kind to him until he met this family. Just from the racial factor, the investigator has doubts too. But I find myself reflecting on some of those wonderful acts of kindness in the film and in real life. It's based on real life. I'm not convinced they were fake just to make money off of this homeless Black teenager. The scene where they stop the car and Michael is walking in the pouring rain to stop at a gym so he can keep himself warm is incredible. Miss Tui orders her husband to stop the car, and Lee runs to Michael and quietly urges him to come and get in the car and take him home. This is a good reflection of her heart and her selfless act of kindness. There were no applause, just the glory of the spirit world bowing down on the family and blessing them. She didn't have to invite a homeless Black boy she saw in the street into her house, but she did. Now for the trigger points. Well, the biggest trigger point for me is straight away in the Green Mile. All my life I have struggled with injustice and being misunderstood, and so have a large percentage of Black people been misjudged and misunderstood. Therefore, extraordinary acts of kindness from John in the Green Mile triggered me. He was so pure. It didn't matter what color the person was, he just did. His gift of healing went unnoticed by the courts because they needed a scapegoat. The justice system couldn't possibly be wrong, could they? And correct the situation by saving a Black man versus the white man while he was the real killer. Where was the act of kindness in my life? Well, in my life, the act of kindness that I did for myself was my quiet act of kindness was on my ability to transmute the negativity and hate projected onto me by low vibrational people whom I absorbed their negativity and believed this was my reality. When I was able to recognize this wasn't my reality and that I had a freedom of choice, I no longer needed to be imprisoned by their facts or their idea of the truth. I began to slowly like myself and maybe even love myself. I realized I had the freedom of choice to create my own reality and stand in my own power. So that was an example of my own personal kindness to myself. And it wasn't out in the spotlight shining. The next one is the wonderful soldier who helped me in the elevator or ascensor or the lift and took me to safety in a taxi. Well, when I was about 23 years old, I was living in New York and I had stayed with my relatives for a year, but they couldn't accommodate me anymore. And so I had to leave. And I couldn't get into the YMCA until the Monday, but I had to leave that Friday because another person was coming in to stay in my room. And so I stayed at who I thought was a friend's house for 2 days. And it was a male friend, and I would sleep on the sofa, and I was fine by that. I was desperate and I was stupid, I must admit that. And with my stupidity, I ended up being physically assaulted and abused. Well, I couldn't leave that night because it was just too obvious. But early in the morning, I left with my suitcase. And as I got to the elevator door or the lift, the doors opened up, and the guy that had attacked me came out with a carving knife. There was a soldier in there, a black man. He pulled my bags in, he pulled me in the elevator, and I went downstairs. And he got a taxi for me, and he shared it with me till I got to my place. No, he didn't share it with me all the way to my place. He got out and paid for the taxi. He was so nice. And he said, "Ma'am, are you okay? You know, I don't think you are. Did he hurt you? Did he touch you?" And I said, "No, it's really okay." But he was so kind and so sweet. That must have been the kindest gesture or the kindest moment I had out of this horrible, horrible nightmare. And the last one is a man that bought my mother and I lunch. Now, when I was about 11 years old, I used to go to Paddington Street and collect a parcel that my aunt had sent us. And afterwards, we'd always go up to Oxford Street to go to a restaurant and have lunch and have a nice dessert. Or one day, this very distinguished looking white man turned around and said he wanted to join us and if it was possible. So he did. And my mother said it was okay. And he wanted to talk to me about so many things. And I was just like surprised. I thought, well, maybe he really likes my mother, but he's trying to make out that he's interested in me, you know, talking to this child, making it look as though he was really interested in children. Well, he got up and left. He goes, "I have to leave now, but it was really nice speaking to you." And I said, "Thank you." And the waitress came by and she said, "Would you like dessert?" So we ordered dessert. And then my mother said, "I'll have the check, please." And then she said, "Oh, you don't need to pay for the check. That man that was sitting with you paid for your lunch." And it was ever so nice. He was really, really lovely. So sometimes when I think of some of these very small little hidden nuggets of acts of kindness, I'm reminded that I do live on this planet and it's not as awful as I thought it was. So thank you for listening, people. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. It's very encouraging and supportive of you. And I'll leave you with my quote, and that is: healing is a lifelong lesson, blessing, and gift we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Healing is a lifelong lesson, blessing, and gift we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Goodbye. Until next time.